Little Girl Lost, the remarkable story of a child whose disappearance sparked the largest search and rescue mission in Arkansas history, and who lived to tell about it. Here with host Esther Luttrell, that child, Haley Zega, and her mother, Kelly.
The date was April 29th, 2001. It was a beautiful spring day, actually, typical of Arkansas about that time of year. The cool, crisp mornings, they warm up considerably by midday, then sort of loop back around to a chill toward evening. Inside a sweet little 2-story home in the historic district near downtown Fayetteville, Haley Zega was helping Haley, her 6-year-old, prepare for a day of adventure with Kelly's parents, Jay and Joyce, whom Haley called Mimi and Pop. Wearing a gray shirt and shorts and tennis shoes, Haley was ready for her first hike through the Ozark National Forest. Her dad, Steve, he was away at a military base doing his 2 weeks of annual training with the Arkansas National Guard when she waved an excited goodbye to her mom and to Senator and LMNO. Those were her pet cats. Kelly planned to start her day shopping for flowers that she was going to plant later in the afternoon after returning from a local film festival. But fate has a way of changing the best laid plans, and Kelly's world was about to take a turn no one could ever have imagined. Haley, take us from the moment you left the house. I understand it was early because your grandparents, they wanted to get to the forest before it got too hot. What do you remember about the early part of the day, honey?
I don't really remember much until we actually got to the woods. And I remember I had a sweatshirt with me, but it was warm enough at that point by the time that we actually got to the trailhead that I decided to leave my sweatshirt in the trunk. And I distinctly remember leaving it and getting ready for the hike.
You know, for those who might not know, the Ozark National Forest, it's about a 1.2 million acre area. It's got tons and tons of trails. And then there's the Buffalo National River that runs through a portion of it. You were awfully little and the forest was awfully big. Was there anything about it that scared you?
I don't think I knew enough about the woods to be scared of them. I didn't have a concept of how truly vast and remote that area is. And so I had no reason to be afraid.
All right, so you're following your grandparents along, Mimi and Pop, that's what you call them.
Yes.
You're following them along. Right. And everything's going well. And then at some point you say what a 6-year-old would logically say, I don't want to go any further. Why'd you do that?
Well, it's a relatively long hike for someone who's never been out in the woods, especially someone who is a small child with short little child legs. And it's also pretty rugged. It's very hilly, and it would tire you out pretty quickly, I think, at that age. Really, at any age, it can tire you out. And I just got to a point where, I was a grumpy, tired 6-year-old, and I said, I'm not going to go any further unless you carry me. And the woods are very rugged, so there was no possibility of being carried out of them, but I was being an obstinate little brat. So
I know what I would have done. Probably a lot of parents and grandparents do the same thing. They say, well, just stay there then because we're going on. And so they take a few steps ahead and look back to see if you're coming, and you don't. They take a few more. And is that sort of what happened to you?
That's exactly what happened. That is exactly what happened. The area where I got lost, it was actually at the top of a waterfall that I wanted to see. And when they wouldn't let me see it, because you have to kind of climb down a tree to get to it, that was the last straw for me. And so I was like, I'm planting myself right here and I'm not moving. And that exactly what you said happened. They said, okay, you're not moving. Well, we're going on. So see you later. Expecting that I was going to follow them. And I did try, but I got my wires crossed. I got turned around. And before I knew it, I was all by myself.
Once they stepped out of your line of vision, I remember you said in one of your interviews that the foliage was quite heavy at that time of year and you couldn't see them any longer. And I can imagine on their side of it, them turning around and realizing they can't see you. So they just retrace their steps. In one of your interviews, you said that you saw a little trail off to a side and you thought it would hook up with where they were. Turned out to be a deer trail and it went deeper into the woods. You want to tell us about that?
That's exactly right. At the time that I went missing, the Whitaker Point Hawksbill Crag Trail was not as well traversed as it is today. It was less well known. And so consequently, there were fewer hikers, which meant that the trail was not as clear as it is if you were to go out there and hike it today. And especially for a child who doesn't know what to look for when trying to locate a trail, any worn path seems like the right one. And so, yeah. And because you can't see very far with the sight lines, with the heavy foliage, it seemed like the right path because it looked like it was going to hook up with the main trail. But obviously it didn't.
So rather than just going on like whistling as you go or humming or anything like that, you really were looking for them.
Yes.
You really were assuming that path was going to hook you back up with them.
Correct. Yeah. I was not trying to get lost. I wasn't trying to run away by any stretch of the imagination.
No. When did you realize you were lost?
Pretty quickly. I mean, it was enough time that I was far enough away that nothing looked familiar. You know, I could look in any direction and I was far enough from my starting point that I had no idea which direction to go in.
Now, all the time you're doing this, are you calling out, Mimi, Papa? Help?
Yeah, I'm sure I was. I don't specifically remember doing that until I got to the river, but I'm sure that I was yelling for them. I didn't want to be alone out there. It was almost instantaneous. There wasn't a line that was drawn between like, I'm not lost, now I am lost. It was just a sort of sudden realization. Yeah.
Can imagine. Well, Kelly, you were blissfully unaware of any of this. Later, what did your parents tell you about those first few minutes when they realized that they'd lost Haley?
Their immediate reaction was to instantly start looking for her. They knew the density of the foliage and how significant that was. And the interesting thing is that they initially, when they started out and turned around and realized that she wasn't immediately behind them, they were reluctant to start yelling for her because there was some concern that she would think she was in trouble. If she, heard yelling or she heard my mother in particular, that her voice was frantic or panicky, she was afraid that would sound like anger or upset at Haley. Because of the density of the undergrowth in that forest, it just muffles sound at an unbelievable level. And so even, within a short period of time, yelling was not going to be heard.
It was quite a while later that you got word that this was all going on.
It was, I'm not exactly sure how much time had passed. I think that the idea was initially that they would be able to find her pretty quickly.
Did we have cell phones in those days? I can't remember.
There is no cell service in the area where Haley was lost. And so even though I had a cell phone with me at the time, it was not functional where Haley was, unfortunately.
Tell us, what were you doing? I understand you went on into town, you got your plants. Where were you when you got the word? How did your day go?
Well, I was having a rare day off from having to worry about anything but what I wanted to do. And that was kind of unusual because I had a pretty demanding job at that time. And my husband was in doing his service with the National Guard. So he was away for, several days. And because Haley had something wonderful that she was going to get to do with her grandparents, I thought, I am going to take this Sunday and just enjoy myself. And so I had gone out shopping for plants. It was, late spring, or actually early spring, and it was time to start planting annuals. And so I was excited about that. And then as soon as I had picked all that up and dropped it off at my house, then I headed to the Fayetteville Film Festival and was really looking forward to just watching several original films and relaxing and waiting for them to get back. And then, we would probably all just gather or do normal things that you do on a Sunday night.
So several hours then had gone by, at least 2 or 3, something like that, before you got word. I believe it was on the intercom while you were at the film festival. They announced
Yes.
you thought it was about your husband. Tell us about that.
Yes. So I'm just sitting there watching a movie, and they actually stopped the film and made an announcement over the loudspeaker that I needed to come to the back of the room. And so obviously that was very startling, because they wouldn't just stop a film for no reason. So I headed back to the back of the room, and I saw 2 people there. One of whom was the wife of one of the people that was another adult that was hiking with my parents and Haley. And he had been able to reach her. I'm not sure how, honestly, and get word to me that I needed to leave the film festival and immediately go home and pick up some supplies to come out to the woods, just in case it was going to go longer than we expected.
Oh my word! I have to interrupt you just for 1 minute, because as a mom and Patrick as a dad, can you even imagine? You've gotten a phone call now that your little girl is lost, and you are stuck. You can't do anything about it. Are you breaking all the traffic laws trying to get home? I mean, how are you talking to God? What are you doing? How do you handle that?
Well, I was shaking. Like it's interesting, because I'm a pretty even keel person, but I immediately went into just sort of a physical panic mode, mind racing, heart pounding, hand shaking. And luckily, the 2 women that had come to give me news that Haley was missing, and as they stated it, Haley has wandered off. I'll never forget those words. They actually loaded me up and took me to my house. And so I didn't drive.
You were driving.
So thankfully, no traffic laws were broken. And my house was not too terribly far from the Fayetteville Square where the film festival was taking place. So
how did you know where to go? Pardon me. I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to ask you, how did you know where to go once you got into the woods? I mean, that's such a vast area.
Well, they knew what trailhead was the location that the party had hiked back to. So there were still some people that were out searching deeper into the trail that was the point where she was last seen. But then other people had come up to the trailhead, which is a recognizable area. And there was an area to park there. So we knew exactly where to go. I didn't know. I had actually never been out there. But the wife of the other hiker had instructions about exactly where to go. And so she was able to take me directly there.
So your parents at some point said to themselves, oh my gosh, we need help. Yes. And so that must have been a terrible decision to make. We're going to leave the area where we could possibly be 3 bushes away from her, and we're going to leave the area and go seek help. What did they do? Go back to the information center or wherever the headquarters is out there?
There's really nothing out there. What they did, so there were actually 5 adults on the hike. There were my parents, and then three friends were with them. Thankfully, they were able to kind of divide and conquer. And so I'm unclear myself as to exactly who went back to a point where someone could be notified that there was an issue. But there are houses located in and around the vicinity, even though it's very remote. There's some cabins in the area. So I believe what happened was that somebody went to one of those locations and informed the police, called the sheriff's office,
really?
And notified authorities that there was an issue.
It's interesting because I would think in a national forest there would be rangers. I mean, in my naive brain, there are ranger stations are strategically located here and there.
There's nothing out there. There's no visitors center. There are no ranger stations. It's not a national park. So it's a national forest. It's protected land, but there's not any infrastructure that you would typically associate with a national park.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. So while all of this was going on, these people were going to cabins. Your grandparents were obviously just being frantic. Your mother was frantically on her way. What were you doing?
Walking.
Were you concerned at this point? Were you?
Yeah, I mean, I knew I was lost, but I didn't. It never crossed my mind that I wouldn't make it out of it. I was determined. I thought I was going to get myself out of it. Like, I thought that I was going to walk back to the truck at that point because I still hadn't made it quite to the river yet. But I thought that I was going to walk myself out of the woods. I was blissfully unaware, I think, of how vast and the fact that I was traveling in the complete wrong direction to get back to the trailhead.
But you all left rather early. Had you had any breakfast or lunch? Were you getting hungry? Were you looking at the berries going, I know not to do that? I read somewhere that, well, I don't know if you read it at 6 years old, but you knew that some berries might be poison. How did you handle all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I was hungry, but I didn't ever attempt to eat anything in the woods. I didn't know what was safe to eat. So I'm not sure how I knew that, but I was a very curious kid. So I kind of soaked up information like a sponge at that point. I still do. I'm still like that. So I guess at some point I had heard that you're not supposed to pick strange berries and eat them, which is, I think, an important thing to tell a child, just even if they're not going to be in the woods, because berries grow everywhere. But
absolutely.
Yeah, I remembered that. And so I didn't eat anything.
I heard you say on a couple of your interviews that that you were following the water as long as you could keep the river in your line of vision. You knew, I think the way you put it in one of the interviews I watched, you said, I knew if I just follow the water, somewhere there'd be a bridge, and where there's a bridge, there's a car, and where there's a car, there were people. Did you say that, or is that a figment of my imagination?
No, that's exactly right. That was exactly my thought process. Although at the early stages, I wasn't at the river yet. I made it to the river on the first day, but time is sort of strange. Like I know it was 20 years ago and I was a kindergartner. And so I know like this thing happened on this day, but I couldn't tell you exactly like the order of events or like, oh yes, at this exact time is when I made it to the river. I don't know. I think that the reason I do have the memories I have is because I've pretty much told this story consistently for my entire life.
But I don't want to make a big deal out of this. I truly don't. But I think it's beautiful, wonderful. I believe you entirely that somewhere on this first day, a little girl, what was her name, Alicia?
Alicia, yeah.
Just suddenly appeared. I don't want to make a spooky event out of it, because when something happens that's out of the commonplace, all we can do is report it. We don't know why. I've heard the many, many theories, and I'm truly not interested in the theory.
I appreciate the kind of objective look at it. I think that this aspect of the story has been sensationalized a lot.
Like you tell me you picked up an acorn. I want to hear about the acorn. You turned around and there's a little girl. I want to hear about the little girl.
I think it's important to, with this aspect of the story, not to speculate, because It's not important to me.
But do tell us about her, because she was an aspect of what happened.
She herself is important to me, but the theories are not important. So I always refer to her as an imaginary friend. And that's how I will always speak about her.
Do you think she was imaginary? I mean, are you just saying this because it's an easy answer?
That's just how I always referred to her.
But you knew she was three-dimensional.
Well, I mean, I knew she wasn't like another missing child. I knew that she wasn't of this physical plane, if that makes sense.
All right. But you saw her. This is what I'm trying to get to.
Yes.
She's not like one of your dolls or an imaginary friend that no one
she was
ever
an imaginary friend.
Or she was an imaginary friend, but you saw her.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, she's the only imaginary friend I've ever had. So that's the only frame of reference I have. I don't know how else to put it.
Right. But you saw her. So you didn't question. I really don't mean to keep delving into this. I just want people to get an image of what you saw. You saw a little girl, and you knew she wasn't a lost little girl.
I was a pretty serious child. I wasn't one to make up imaginary friends. And so
but I think what I'm trying to get at is you saw her, you accepted that she was there. There was nothing spooky or scary about it.
Correct.
And I understand she kind of showed you the way to the water. But again, I'm not trying to make her a guardian angel because I don't know what she was. But the two of you found the water together, right?
Yes, that's right.
It wasn't in your head. She talked to you with a voice.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really specifically remember how we interacted. I mean, we did interact, and like I did make it to the water without having the awareness that there even was a river there.
I had to chuckle when I heard you say somebody was trying to, I think, make a lot more of this. And you said, well, we played patty cake and told each other stories. Yeah.
I wasn't afraid of her. I wasn't afraid of the woods. I wasn't afraid of any animals or anything like that. At no point. I mean, I understood that it was a dire situation, but at no point did I not believe that I was going to come out of it.
Where did you spend that first night? Was it in a cave, did I hear?
That was actually the second night. The first night, there were helicopters that had started flying over the river valley and trying to find me. I didn't know for sure that they were looking for me, but I thought that if they could see me, then that would be great and I would be found.
Was there more than one?
Oh, yeah, lots. Like, I mean, I don't know how many helicopters, but I mean, they would pass overhead very regularly. But I also I didn't know if that was maybe normal for the woods. You know, I was hoping that people were looking for me.
How did you try to get their attention?
I was throwing sand in the air.
Oh, that'll do it.
I was just, and I kept thinking like maybe I should climb a tree, but there were no trees that were climbable for me at that point. But I was really just trying desperately to like make myself as big as possible.
Did you go out into the river and get on a rock? I think I heard that.
Yes, that was where I spent the first night.
I think it's amazing you weren't swept away in the water. Did you swim?
Is. No, I still, that's another miracle of this story. Because I've been back out on that river multiple times canoeing, and there are places where the current is extremely strong.
Yeah.
I genuinely don't know how I wasn't swept away.
But you did get up on a rock.
Yes, I did. It took me what seemed like hours. I don't know how long it actually took me to climb up onto this rock, but I was determined to do it because I thought that they would be able to see me better, that the helicopters would be able to see me if I wasn't under the trees. If I was in the middle of the river, then I would be easier to see.
Were you waving your arms?
Oh yeah, of course. I was doing everything I could to try to get them to see me, and they never did.
And then they flew away, and so now you go back across the little part of the river and get back into the land.
That was the next day. So I spent the night on top of the rock.
You did?
Yes.
You slept on the rock? You could have fallen asleep and rolled off.
Could have, but I didn't.
Amazing. I haven't heard that before. It gets cold out there and you're exposed then. You don't even have foliage around you and you're wet.
Yes.
Were you cold?
Was very cold at night. It got hot during the day, but at night it was really cold and I was damp.
It was in the 40s, around like the mid 40s.
And she's just got this little t-shirt and her shorts. I'm not going to keep harping on this, but just curious to know, was your little friend with you on the rock?
Yeah. She was with me the whole time from when I knew I was lost until I was found.
Kelly, how did the helicopters get involved?
Well, I think that once they recognized how serious the situation was, both by bringing people into the woods to start the search and even bringing some search and rescue dog teams out and not having any luck to that point, they realized that they were going to have to get a lot more serious about the situation. And
who is they if there are no park rangers involved?
Well, there actually eventually were park rangers involved that are associated with the park system there. So even though it's not staffed and there's not a visitor center or specific stops that people make that are part of the forest, there are people who are assigned to the management and I guess probably to some degree, law enforcement in association with it.
So when you called the police, that sort of kicked all of that into gear. They knew who to contact.
Precisely. Yeah. So I think, anytime there's a missing person situation in a setting like that, they do have some protocols that they kick into.
Did they bring out tents and how does that work?
Our immediate family, my parents, and then my husband and I and some friends kind of split up between two cabins that were nearby. So my husband and I stayed at the cabin of Tim Ernst, who is very knowledgeable about the area and was one of the first people to be notified that there was an issue. And he gets pulled into a lot of search and rescue efforts that occur in that area because people do get lost somewhat regularly. So we ended up going to his home, and that's where we stayed for the duration.
When did the media get involved?
The media got involved very quickly for a couple of different reasons. My husband and I were both very active in the community. And so when our name became associated with the situation, the last name Zega is not a very common name. And so people knew immediately what family this was. And I have worked in the journalism field and worked a lot in media relations. And so when that name went out there and people recognized it and knew who either my husband, who was a Washington County Quorum Court member, a justice of the peace, and I was involved with media relations, people just jumped on the story.
I don't know if people know a lot about Fayetteville. As I understand, it's a college town, isn't it?
It is.
So probably a community that's that small and yet that sophisticatedly everybody got involved in one way or another, just about everybody anyway, didn't they?
We were just blown away by the degree of support that was rallied on our behalf. First of all, it started out with media support and just trying to get the word out that there was an issue. Mm-hmm. But very quickly, that effort turned to supporting the search and rescuers that were flooding into the area in subsequent days, collecting water and food. The Red Cross rolled out.
What I was going to say, all of a sudden, you've got a little city going on here. You've got to have nutrition. You've got to have water. You've got to have all kinds of supplies. People's doors have to be open so they can use restrooms. There's just a whole new world opens up very quickly, I would think.
Well, and actually restrooms, that had to be set up. They had to bring out and create basically like a tent city. So they moved from the original location where a lot of cars gathered for that first day in trying to start the search and rescue effort. And they recognized how big it was ballooning into very, very rapidly. So they located a nearby field and that became the command center. And so all of the law enforcement operations, media, as well as the just support system that was levied by the Red Cross, that all relocated to a larger location.
So it became a national media occasion very quickly then, not just a local.
It did.
Did you sleep that night?
No, that first night was pretty awful. And I remember so distinctly, I was standing in the bathroom near the bedroom where we were staying, and the window was open a crack and it was cold. And, like I said, it got down into the 40s. And I remember standing there and thinking that I didn't want to put on any more clothes or get a blanket because I wanted to understand what that temperature felt like and how that might be affecting Haley.
You would actually feel guilty if you got yourself all warm and snuggly, knowing your little girl was out there somewhere, shorts and a T-shirt. Right.
But I was truly trying to sort of gauge it in my own mind. How dangerous is this temperature?
You were probably thinking about things she wasn't thinking about, like snakes and bears, weren't you?
Yeah, we were all concerned about that. And, there's also mountain lions in that area. And I had never honestly thought about mountain lions until someone brought it to my attention that they are able to grab and drag close to their own weight or more than their own weight for a significant amount of distance. And they can be pretty vicious. So, we were concerned about mountain lions. We also know for certain there are quite a few bears out there. And there are definitely poisonous snakes. There are copperheads and rattlesnakes out there. So
we've been on that trail. Like we have in recent years been on that exact trail and seen venomous snakes literally just right off the trail. So they're definitely out there, but I had no concern about that.
Even water moccasins around the river, water moccasins.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. I would say all 3 of the poisonous snakes in Arkansas would have been located right in that area.
Did you ever have a moment where you said, I'm never going to see her again?
Nothing conscious. I know I'm a pretty rational person. So I knew how incredibly terrifying and scary the situation was. I was concerned that when we found her, I really believed that we would find her, but I was afraid that she might be really injured because of the ruggedness of the area. And, just worrying if she was injured, would she then get hypothermia? What are the more critical things that could happen to her? But I refused to believe that she wouldn't be found.
I'm not trying to turn this into a religious program, but were there groups of people who came to you and offered prayer, or did you tell yourself, God is going to take care of her? He's got to. This is too big for me.
I believed we knew how much prayer was happening. And in fact, the church we attended, Sequoia United Methodist in Fayetteville, was absolutely incredible. They put together really a 24-hour long prayer chain they rolled out in a really significant way. And by their responding that way, of course, they were pushing out their prayer requests to other churches. And before we knew it, we were hearing word that there were prayer chains as far as Hong Kong to have her safely returned.
You know what? We need to hear something like that. With everything the world's going through right now, we need to know there are people out there who are still good folks who really care about other people.
Yes.
Now, Haley, you wake up. It's your second morning. The sun is shining. You have got to be hungry, honey.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I was hungry and thirsty, but that was not my immediate concern. I mean, I remember before I went to bed, I say went to bed, before I fell asleep. And there was
before you went to rock.
Yeah, before I went to rock. I remember thinking maybe when I wake up, it turns out that this was all a dream, but it was not a dream. So yeah, I wake up and I'm like, darn, I'm still in the woods. I still never wavered in my determination that I was going to get myself out of it, that I was going to come out of it. And so I was like, okay, well, this is day 2. I got off the rock and had to cross the river again and just kept walking in the direction that I thought was best. And the night before, I could see lights on the mountains because it is very remote, but there are people who live out there. I mean, I had no way of gauging the distance. I had no idea how far away they were, but I could see lights. So I knew there were people. And so I think I was like, okay, I'm going to walk in the direction of those lights because I know there are people that way.
But still staying close to the river.
Yeah, I was within sight of the river from the moment I got to the river until I was found.
I think it's incredible that you knew and believed yourself enough to know not to eat things that may be poisonous, even though your little tummy must have been growling by now.
Oh, yeah. No, I was definitely hungry, but I didn't.
Ready to slam a squirrel over the head or something.
I really never saw many animals.
Yeah, I heard you say that. You saw squirrels, and that's about it.
Birds. Saw some birds.
Made friends with a caterpillar.
Yeah, I had no interactions with any wildlife.
No mammals.
No mammals.
So you kept walking. And while you're walking, your mama and your grandma and all of these people are searching. But they've got 1.2 million acres that they could go around. Kelly, was there anything special about any of the rescue teams or those people that were so helpful and so concerned about you?
There is no way that I could possibly select one person and call them more significant or special than anybody else. The amount of effort that went into the search, both in terms of organizing it and just managing the incredible number of details, was just a Herculean task. And there were actually 2 rangers that traded off command of the search because it was around the clock and they obviously couldn't work for 24 hours straight. So there were 2 gentlemen that switched off and on to manage the command. So that was enormous. The media really went above and beyond, even though it was a sensational story. I believe that they were very benevolent in the way that they handled it. I don't think they sensationalized it any further than what it was already on its own. And because of that, it really rallied this just unbelievable amount of support in our region. And just that amount of energy flowing towards us, that positivity was something that kept us going. And so in addition to people that actually came to the woods and, put lives on hold to search for her, there were people back at home who couldn't leave their jobs or were not equipped to be out there searching, but they were putting money into supplies. They were starting prayer chains. They were doing all the different things that really brought the community together. And it still resonates now. It's incredible 20 years later that I still, and Haley is still asked about this on a regular basis by people who remember the story, remember telling their children what not to do, which is, there's some benefit from that. But also people who were active searchers or family members of active searchers, and they were changed by this experience, just like we were. And so everyone who was invested in this was incredibly special to us. And we will never know all of the people who invested time and effort and prayer and resources into searching for Haley, but we will never stop being grateful.
Haley, you had no idea you were so important, did you? No idea.
Oh, well, I was an only child, so I'm sure I had an inflated sense of self-importance. But no, I had, that's totally a joke. I had no concept.
Of course you did. Of course. Did it ever cross your mind? Hey, heck, they're never going to find me.
No, I was sure I was going to get out of it.
What do you think kept your spirits up?
A combination of pig-headedness and naivete.
I was just going to say, what were the programs you watched on television? I know in my time it would have been, like Superman. And so we have this mentality that says it's going to have a happy ending. I'm not sure kids today have that because all of their heroes do things that are anti-hero. We had real heroes. Did you?
Well, I was a big fan of the Powerpuff Girls when I was a kid. And I mean, still, because that's like girl power. And, the Powerpuff Girls, they were kindergarten aged girls, which was my age. I was a kindergarten aged girl. And, I don't really have a frame of reference for like what children's media was like before me, besides like Tom and Jerry. And, I love the classic cartoons, but Powerpuff Girls is like an example, I think, of like a really early children's cartoon that was geared towards all the amazing and wonderful things that little girls can do, that little girls are smart and tough and powerful and can be the heroes of their own story. And so I had that example. And I saw, I was like, well, Blossom is smart and she is tough and she gets through everything. So I'm going to get through this.
I was going to say you must have identified with Blossom. That was what I was.
Oh, yeah. I was totally a Blossom girl.
I think it's amazing. I used to give screenwriting workshops and I would tell the aspiring writers, you have no idea the influence. You have the ability to change minds. Unfortunately, so many of them use that for the negative. And thank goodness you had a program like that had that positive image for you. I'm going to ask something that I know everybody thinks, and I don't know how many people have asked you this because I don't think I've heard you address it really. Your parents, Kelly, are going through all of this. Was there ever a point, even if you turned right around and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't really mean that," or where you find yourself placing blame or pointing a finger, or did anybody else?
No, I totally thought it was my own fault. Like I was like, oh, I got myself into this, which I think is why I was so determined to get myself out of it.
Well, what about you, Kelly? Did you find yourself pointing your finger at your folks, even if just for a moment?
No, I never did, because having had the advantage of being raised by my parents and knowing how remarkable they are and how the day had been planned on Haley's behalf to actually give her a special experience. It was never a situation where I thought there was neglect or any kind of disconnect. It was an accident or just a mishap. And so I knew it was nobody's fault. It just happened. Unfortunately, we did deal with people saying all sorts of horrible things in the media. Not the media itself, but we especially saw this in talk radio or comments on news stories from people that would just say some enormously ugly, incorrect things, both about my parents, about Haley, just making a whole lot of guesses about what happened that were simply not accurate.
And so that is one of the dangers of social media right now, the knee-jerk reaction to everything. The adamant views on things that people honestly know very little about.
Yes.
And, I think, Haley, they were not only blessed to have a kid like you, but you were awfully blessed to have parents and grandparents who come from such a positive place, such a positive frame of mind.
I definitely sometimes sit back and marvel at like how lucky I am to have been brought up in the family that I was brought up in. I truly can't imagine a better scenario. Like I often tell my friends, besides this like one major blip, I had a pretty idyllic childhood. Yes, there was this one crazy thing that happened to me very young, but beyond that, I really was brought up in an extremely loving, supportive home. And I still have a wonderful support system. And it's not even just my family, like the community that I was raised in is so willing to show up for me and for anyone in the community. Like it truly is amazing how lucky, how blessed I was, and how blessed I think so many people who live here and were brought up in this wonderful place are. And I think it took me, I went to college out of state, and I think it took me going out of state to truly appreciate like how amazing and wonderful the place that I'm from is.
You talk about everybody being there for you, but I suspect that's rather reciprocal. I have a feeling that they were there for your mom and your grandparents and you, and because they knew that if the situation were reversed, they would be there for them.
Yes.
And I have to think, and I imagine you do too, that things happen for reasons. You've lived a lovely, protected life. You had good people around you.
Sure. It was a secure upbringing. I was at a very young age exposed to something that most people only have a concept of, will never actually experience, something that is very dangerous. A near-death experience at a very young age, I think I don't think I'm traumatized by any means, but I think it gives me a very unique perspective about how dangerous the world can be. And in my 26 years, I have done some things. I have seen some things. Most of them have been very good. I've had a very good life so far, but I've seen a lot of the world.
Everybody has a story. And the only difference between a winner and a loser is how you live your story. From this perspective, listening to you, I have to think that you've been given a story to tell. And you have a platform and you have a way to share wonderfully positive attitudes. You can't shape what somebody else is going to go through, but when somebody else goes through something, had they heard you today, they're going to have something to think about. Maybe they didn't have the same kind of family you do, but they have your words today to hold on to when something happens to them. And I think you were perhaps chosen as an agent, and you're a darn good one. You're a marvelous agent. I do want to say to you, Kelly, that you're going on to your second night now, and there's no trace of this child. How do you face that second night, you and your husband?
So it's I learned a lot about myself in this experience. And what I did learn very definitively is that my tendency is toward action when things are out of control. Mm-hmm. So I look for things that are positive, forward motion activities that I think may help the situation. And so my whole focus became being super insanely positive to anybody who spoke to me. The searchers that knew where we were staying, that were personal friends and people who knew us, were stopping in to see us. I'm seeing family members. And my whole objective was to be so hopeful and so insanely positive that it would cause them to go back out and keep trying and keep trying and keep trying until we found her. Yeah. The other thing was that as we were approaching the end of the second day, and there was some concern that maybe this was not just a lost child, but maybe there was a criminal investigation to be launched because there is no trace of her. Mm-hmm. And we started thinking that we needed to rally the troops to put out a reward and to actively go public with, if she is returned to us safely and unharmed, there will be a reward for her safe return. And so I was able to start working through my network of friends and professional connections to get that done, working with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, all of the different components that are involved with trying to find a missing child. I just busied myself with the tasks at hand so that, number one, I could stop thinking about how scared I was. And number two, I could actually be productive.
You are an inspiration, girl. You are an inspiration. All right. Let's switch back here. Let's kind of wind this up with Haley here. Haley, I understand that two fellows, each riding a mule, suddenly came into your line of vision.
William Jeff Valines and Lytle James.
Where were you, and how did these gentlemen on mules come to run across you? This is the third day.
This is the third day, yes.
Yeah.
I was sitting next to the river, and I was pretty exhausted at this point, but I was just taking a break.
You were actually lying down.
No, I don't remember
because when they saw her, they thought she was just a little heap of clothes. She was such a tiny little lump on the side of the river.
Yeah. Well, then there you go. So
a wet, hungry lump.
Yes. And then suddenly they were there, and I don't remember exactly what they said to me. I think it's written down somewhere, but it was something along the lines of like, are you the little girl, or like,
Or so they had heard about, were they actually part of the search
team?
They
were actively looking for me.
Oh, yes. Were they? Oh, yes. I thought they were just fellows out riding their mules for the day or something.
No, they were actively looking for me.
Taking a mule ride. Oh, my goodness, they must have been thrilled. Were you scared of them when you look up and you saw these guys on mules?
No, I was just relieved to see people.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So did they pick you up then and take you back with them, or what happened next?
Yes. So they gave me chocolate pudding and Diet Coke.
Just health foods, huh?
Yeah.
And lifesavers.
And lifesavers, yeah. And then they put me on the mules. On
Big Mama.
Big Mama. Yeah. One of the mules was named Big Mama.
And she was big indeed.
Yeah.
Poor little Haley. Big Mama's back was so wide that her legs were sticking straight out on either side. It was not the most comfortable ride.
I do remember that being extremely uncomfortable because I was too small to be riding a mule that big.
You must have been so relieved to see somebody. So glad to see them. I mean, you get on on a mule with people you never saw before, just totally trusting, because everything else you didn't know be not trusting.
No, I didn't really have a choice. It was a choice of staying in the woods or go with these strangers, and I picked to go with the strangers.
What a blessing they were, what they presented themselves to be. Now, had you gotten word, Kelly, that they were on their way in, or was it total surprise when here comes your little girl with her legs sticking out on the back of a mule?
Well, it was a complete surprise. In fact, at the point that she had been found, meanwhile, and again, because there's no cell phone service, there was no way for them to notify anybody without riding back up the mountain to the command center search area. Nobody knew that they had found her. And my husband and I were actually in a hunting cabin with media from everywhere doing a press conference, basically begging for her safe return. It was horrible. And so we were headed back after the conference to Tim Ernst's cabin to just try to figure out what to do next. And shortly after we were there, the sheriff from Washington County, which it's outside of his jurisdiction, but he was there part of the search. The sheriff, who we knew quite well, was coming down the hill toward the cabin in his vehicle. And we're standing out on the porch of the cabin and, the bottom of our stomach falling out because you don't know if it's good news or bad news. He gets out of the cruiser, starts walking down towards us and has this very serious look on his face. And we're all just holding our breath. Mm-hmm. And then he says, "I've got a little girl who's looking for her mama."
I just got goosebumps.
The best sound I have ever heard in my life happened just then, which was about 30 people who happened to be in the vicinity just screaming and cheering.
I'm ready to do that myself right now, 20 years later.
It was incredible.
So did you get in the cruiser and go back then?
Well, first I had to run back in the cabin because Haley didn't have her blankie. She was a blankie girl and she didn't have it. And I could not possibly return to her side without her blankie, knowing how much she loved it. And so I went running back into the cabin. People thought I had lost my mind because they're like, "Where aren't you going with Sheriff Whitmill?" And so I found her blankie and went running back out to the car. And I actually ran up and hugged him so hard. And I caught his elbow right below my eye and gave myself a mild black eye. I was so happy. And so my husband and I, loaded up and they hauled us back out of there. And we had the windows rolled down and there's searchers all in the vicinity and were screaming at them that she had been found.
Oh my gosh.
And we could hear people calling to each other because the way the search was set up, you had partners that you would go out with and they were calling to each other and you could hear it through the woods.
Going through the woods.
It was the most incredible moment.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, Haley, were you just amazed at all of the people and all of the attention?
I don't really remember. Where I remember attention most was actually after I got home, after my stay in the hospital. I remember getting in the back of the ambulance and they had me drinking Pedialyte and I remember hating it. I remember thinking it was so gross, but they were like, "You need to drink this, you're dehydrated." And I just really didn't want to. And I was just so exhausted. Like, I know that I was relieved, but I was so exhausted that I don't think I was being, outwardly expressive at all.
No, she was
awfully glad to see your mom, surely.
Of course,
and that binky.
Yes. I do remember distinctly thinking, like, this is the first time I've ever seen my dad cry. But,
and your grandparents, were they on hand when you got back?
Yeah, but I don't remember other people being around. I know that they were. I just
There was a huge amount. There was media everywhere, so it was actually pretty chaotic in the area.
That would almost be too much for a young mind to process. Just the fact that she was rescued was enough to process. Then go to the hospital. But I want to ask you this. What was the first thing you did when you get back home? You're going to hug Senator. You're going to hug, what's his name? L-M-N-O. And you want to tell me where you got that name?
Well, those cats are actually older than me, so I didn't name them.
Oh, you're not guilty, huh?
No, we like funny names for our pets.
You did it on that one. But what was the first thing you did when you get home? Did you grab your animals and go to bed for 3 days?
I think well, for one, there was like media camped out on our front lawn. Like it wasn't a peaceful, calm homecoming. There were, it was still a circus. And
so you were confused by all of the media.
I mean, I think at that point, because I realized that this was a news story. I wasn't like shocked. It wasn't calm.
It was wild.
And
I'll tell you the first thing that you did when you got home, and that was you ran upstairs and got dress up clothes on.
Sounds bad.
Because she was dressed like a princess basically every moment that she didn't have to be in school.
Yeah, I'm still like that. Yeah.
Did the media try to interview you, Haley?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I did lots of media interviews. I don't think right after I got home, but it was pretty close. It was pretty quick.
Yeah. The Democrat Gazette actually did a story almost immediately the day after.
Did it kind of you go to your 6-year-old head that you were getting all this attention?
I didn't like it.
You didn't get to be a drama queen over that.
I was not. I definitely got to the point where I was really tired of it. It's funny because who I am as a person now, it doesn't make sense that I wouldn't have enjoyed the attention, but I really didn't. I was pretty introverted. I was pretty shy. Yeah.
Well, a great example of it is the producers from Oprah contacted us and spoke to me to see if there would be interest in coming on the show. And then they spoke to Haley, and Haley politely declined.
I didn't know who Oprah was. If I had known, I probably would have done it. So
you were getting plenty of attention. You were getting plenty of attention. And then how long was it after that Dateline contacted you and you did end up doing an hour episode of that? Was that sometime later?
What was I, 7 by the time the Dateline episode came out?
Yeah. It was shot the summer after. So it was shot within a few months of the whole thing happening, but it didn't air until the following year.
Okay. So here we are now. Suddenly there's this burst of renewed public interest in you. Wasn't there a book written about you?
Yes. Well, the book happened very quickly after that happened. I think, I don't know exactly when it was published, but it was almost immediately.
Yeah, it was within the year.
Within the year of going missing.
So if you cooperated, it was an authorized book, not an unauthorized book.
Yes, that's correct. I actually drew the pictures for the chapters, for the chapter headings.
Oh my gosh.
So the 6-year-old art.
It's very cute.
Patrick wrote a children's book, and he had his children do all the artwork. And it's the most precious thing.
Well, I'm sure your children are more talented than I was.
I'm sure they were.
I doubt it.
My drawing of a mule, I think, looked more like a house, and it was just not acceptable. So
it's in there.
What has brought on this renewed interest all of a sudden?
For the 19th anniversary, I made a YouTube video, partly because I do still get asked about it with relative regularity. And it's not that I'm tired of telling the story, but I do tend to, when people ask, give a sort of Spark Notes version, and I don't go into a ton of detail. Yeah. So I made the YouTube video partly because I had time, because this was the beginning of the pandemic when I filmed it.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'll put this out for the 19th anniversary on May 1st, 2020. And I mostly did it so that I could, if people asked me about my story, I could send them to the video.
Further on.
Here you go.
Exactly.
Here's all the details.
Yep.
And I didn't really expect it to get a ton of attention. It got a couple of thousand views, mostly from sharing it on Facebook and just the small social media following that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much where it stayed for about 8 months. A couple of YouTubers did their own videos on it. Mostly there was a guy in France who covered my story in French, and I don't speak French. So
you don't know what
I was more than happy to let him do that.
And I just carried you along pretty well. We'll just have faith that he did a really good job.
And I had done a podcast a year before I made the video. So I linked the podcast and the video. So it didn't get, a ton of attention, a couple thousand views. And then all of a sudden on New Year's Day, 2021, I start getting all of these new Instagram followers. And someone messaged me on Instagram and they were like, hey, this YouTuber who has over 1 million subscribers just posted a video about your story. And he linked my video in his video, but had no idea that he was going to cover it. I was like completely blindsided by it. And honestly, it kind of freaked me out. I was very stressed out about it for a
You lose
couple of
control.
days.
That does make you feel odd.
Yeah. So all of these comments were flooding in. It's been long enough now that I've sort of adjusted to it, but kind of like with the media attention that I was getting when it first happened, I just didn't know what to do with it.
Well, you were too young. You've had a lot of years to think about it.
Well, sure. But I mean, with the renewed attention, because I wasn't expecting it, it really freaked me out. But
I don't know how anybody could hear your story and not realize that it's a miraculous story. It is a miraculous story. And knowing that, I'm going to turn this to Kelly. Is there anything you want others to know or to learn from what all you've been through? What would you say to a parent today if you knew that their child was missing?
Well, there's some tactical things that I would recommend that relate to going on a hike or being out in the woods or really going anywhere. And that is that if you, and this is true for adults and for children, if you find that you are lost or you think you may be lost, then stop moving. Because if Haley had not continued on the path that she did, thinking that she was going to get herself out of this problem, she would have been found within the hour, most likely. But that was not the case. And so she moved very quickly outside of the range that they thought that she would be. And so they weren't even looking where she ended up by the first night. I recommend actually something very specific, and that is two things. First of all, if you go hiking, carry a whistle, because you will only be able to yell for so long without losing your voice. But a whistle is a very efficient way to make a lot of noise, and it's small and easy to deal with and inexpensive. So anybody can have that on hand, and it make it very much easier to find.
What about clothing? Do you recommend anything?
Neon is not necessary, but certainly something that is not browns and grays and black.
Not earth tones.
Or
right.
greens.
Yeah. The other thing that I really recommend is if, and this is true, adults or children, if it looks as though you are going to be out overnight, look for a cedar tree. And that's something that parents can teach their children what a cedar tree looks like, because a cedar tree will deflect water better than a lot of other foliage. And so if a child or an adult identifies themselves as being connected to a cedar tree and sticks with it, they are going to have both shelter as well as a standard solid place that they're going to stay. And so that's something super simple that is just
I've never heard that. I've never heard anyone say that. Have you thought about writing a book yourself about how to survive?
We've talked about it, doing something specifically for children.
Yeah. We're by no means, I'm not a survival expert. I don't do search and rescue. We're not experts, but we have picked up some helpful tips.
I think of all the helpful tips, and the cedar tree is interesting, and wearing something bright, that's interesting. And the whistle is certainly interesting, but I got to tell you, I think that what you have to impart more than anything else is attitude. If they don't learn anything else, then you're so often what we fear, we bring on ourselves. And if you continually harp in your mind even on the negative, you're going to attract it. That's just my theory. Haley, what's next for you, hon?
Well, I went to college for acting. I have a BA in acting. And so that's what I'm trying to do now. I also, I write, and I am starting to build up my YouTube channel now that I have this following that I did not expect to have. I have some plans for my YouTube channel, but mostly it's focusing on my art and focusing on telling more stories. I think at my core, the thing I'm most passionate about is telling stories, and there are lots of different formats for that.
Before you get way, way, way out of our price range, we have a budget that runs to shoestring and just under. But we'd love it if you'd consider coming telling a story for us. We do a lot of dramatized stories. So if you'd ever want to, I'm putting you on the spot here. But
no, absolutely.
Very rude of me, but I thought I would take advantage of the moment.
Absolutely.
We wish you all the luck in the world. I'd say God bless you, but God did bless you. So may God continue to bless both of you. Thank you so much, darling. We'll be looking for you on Netflix and everywhere else there is to see you, Soul. You're so pretty.
Oh, thank you.
So sweet. And I'm sure everybody just has to love you. Kelly, you're the best mom in the world that I've ever heard of. And
I would agree.
I know you're an inspiration to anybody who's going to hear this. And God bless your mom and dad. Are they still with us?
Yes, they are. We're very, very blessed that my grandparents are still alive.
Seldom hear anybody refer to their story, and their story to me, it's inspirational too, because that was a horrible thing to live through for them. And thank God they raised you as they did. They had to have come from some pretty good stock too. It says a lot for the family unit, doesn't it?
That's so true. We were bound and determined that was going to be unshakable. And it's all you have at the end of the day.
It really is.
The people that you love. And so I never, ever wanted that to be jeopardized by one moment in a lifetime.
Well, I got to say, of all the miracles that happened, the miracle of meeting you two is something I'll never forget. Thank you so much. And I think the day that we started talking about all this, I called you for something totally unrelated. And I said, I just don't believe in accidents. So God bless again. Patrick, do you have anything you want to say?
I want to talk another time more about Alicia. I wrote a book on imaginary friends, and it's a fascinating topic to me. But that's for another time.
Wind us up, precious.
This is Jeff Evans. Patrick McGranahan was your announcer. Esther Luttrell was host and producer.
And a very special thank you to Fesleyan Studios for their wonderful music.